We were having a really beautiful long weekend. The foundation is so generous in supporting the well-being of staff members and volunteers and gifts us some time off to celebrate, I'll say Interdependence Day here in the United States. So returning back to the flow, to the rhythm of what it means to be an advocate and supporting our community here, living with and impacted with Parkinson's. So thank you so much for being here. Would like to share that next week I'll be guiding us through our mindful meditation, relaxing into presence. So if that sounds like something you might be interested, inviting you personally to join us. You'll see that we like to engage with one another through the chat box. So feel free to write where you're tuning in from. It's always nice to see how we are touching corners of the globe around the world in community, practicing mindfulness, living with Parkinson's, or in some way impacted by it. So it's a good reminder to recognize that we are not alone through this and are able to connect through this magical thing called the World Wide Web. And just acknowledging support from the Light of Day Foundation, whose generosity has made this programming possible. The Parkinson's Foundation provides weekly education and wellness programs virtually through our PD Health at Home series, which includes Mindfulness Mondays, Wellness Wednesdays, and Fitness Fridays. As a reminder, we meet on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at the same time. That's 1 p.m. Eastern time zone. And this week we are having a webinar on self-motivation and engaging in meaningful activity. So self-motivation drives us to keep going, to take opportunities, and to show commitment to what we want to achieve. You're showing that by being present here today to practice mindfulness and community. So this Wednesday, we'll bridge self-motivation with meaningful activity that is tailored to an individual's needs and preferences. So we'll learn more about what it means to engage in meaningful activity and how you can apply that to daily living, physical function, and so forth. So you can learn more and register at PD Health at Home, parkinson.org/PD Health. And now it's time for us to settle in and receive moments of mindfulness together in community with the guidance of our dear friend, Dr. Taylor Rush. Dr. Rush, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Krista. It's good to see everyone today. And I always love looking at the chat and looking at all the different places that people are calling in from. It's amazing to be able to join with you all in this space. So I was talking to Krista a little bit. I was having a conversation with someone last week about the concept of stress management. And I'm kind of curious for you guys. Have there been times or situations where maybe with a medical provider or even a friend where they've told you you really need to manage stress? I feel like a lot of times we hear these words, and I think the message that comes across ends up landing very differently depending on the person and what they're going through. And for me as a health psychologist, I work with a lot of people who have chronic neurologic conditions. And I feel like when a lot of folks hear that term, stress management, it might hit a little differently for them than it does for others. So if you guys are open to this in the chat, I would love to hear what you think when you hear that phrase, stress management. And if someone says you need to manage your stress, what does that mean to you? What do you hear when you hear that recommendation? Give a moment for folks to type. It's when you, yes. So Krista, thank you. So what do you think or feel when someone says you need to manage your stress? Perfect. Someone said setting boundaries. You are a wild and crazy person who needs to settle down a bit or a lot. Not letting stress control me. What I've been told was you need to reduce the stress in your life. My response is, yeah, right. Another person said, makes my stress worse. Oh, brother, take care of myself first, then my partner. Take control of your stress, maybe fight it. You are trying to do too much. Ways to relax. That they think I'm showing stress with my behavior. And someone says it makes sense when I am not stressed. I think of how many things I'm doing. Let it go. And Krista said, but how do I do that? So you need to take more deep breaths. Okay. These are really good. So I think it's very interesting because everyone, again, there's a slightly different interpretation depending on the person. And then someone said, first I take a really deep breath and think of the many blessings I have, which is a wonderful strategy if we can remember to do it in those moments, right? Someone said, I know they care. And sometimes it is coming from a place of care. And sometimes it can sometimes feel like almost like a judgment is what I'm hearing people say also. Get yourself together. Yes. And, so again, for me, so I'm a health psychologist, right? And I am definitely a proponent of cultivating healthy coping strategies. That's what I do for a living. But I think a lot of times we may have some unrealistic expectation for what stress management actually means and what it looks like. And so I think sometimes when we consider that word stress and people say you need to manage your stress, I think it's sometimes over pathologized. Like stress is this terrible thing and it's making you worse, and you need to try to avoid it or minimize it at any cost necessary. You're not doing a good enough job, is sometimes the implicit judgment you might even hear. And which can be, I think, really disheartening for people. One, because we live in a world that's stressful. I don't know that there is a facet of our lives that doesn't involve some sort of stress. There's finances, there's relationships, there's day-to-day responsibilities, there's turning on the news at any given hour to hear about some horrible thing that's going on in the world at large. And then of course there's, trying to manage and deal with Parkinson's disease. And this is something that I hear so much from the folks that I work with, that, day-to-day things, it takes twice as long to do half as much, right? It's hard to just get around and do a lot of what you would normally want to do or need to do that you wouldn't think of, with two thoughts before. You would just do it. And that is stressful because your body isn't necessarily cooperating with you nearly to the degree that you expect or are used to. And so we have a lot of avenues for stress to occur. And in some ways, stress is meant to serve a purpose. Evolutionarily speaking, back in the day, our ancestors that ran from and planned against, the lions and tigers and bears, they're the ones that didn't get eaten. So in some ways, we have been, bred to have some stress and some anxiety. And in present day, it helps us to activate and get through demanding circumstances. And so, it's not necessarily always a bad thing. And sometimes we have some really valid reasons to be stressed. All of those things that we've mentioned, including the one that brings everyone here today, which is Parkinson's. And so I tell my patients, you have very understandable and valid reasons to feel the way that you do. And it's okay to acknowledge that. As otherwise, if I just say, well, I just need to manage stress better, it might lead to feeling like you're not enough or that you're not doing the job that you ought to. And people can sometimes end up blaming themselves for the symptoms that they're experiencing, emotional, symptoms that are, valid. They may feel upset, they may feel angry, they may feel fear, and, some of the struggle that goes along with it. And so people end up doing the should thing, right? I shouldn't feel that way, or I shouldn't be so stressed. And we end up, in this kind of blame, shame kind of cycle. And so when we think about that as it relates to mindfulness, I think that, another thing that I often hear from folks is that I don't always necessarily feel relaxed after I do some of these meditations or some of these mindfulness practices. And I will often respond with, that's okay. It doesn't always lead to a sense of feeling completely like you're zenned out on a lily pad somewhere. Managing stress doesn't always mean that you'll be relaxed because, again, sometimes you're stressed for a really good reason. And sometimes I think more of the goal of being mindful of stress is to understand maybe why you're stressed and how to mitigate some of the overwhelm that can attach itself to stress. And so I will often tell, my patients that I work with is, if after a mindfulness session, you do some practice, if you can feel maybe a sense of clarity to the emotions that are currently, feeding into your experience, if you can better understand your intention for how you want to live your day, if you can promote awareness and perspective of what's going on in your life and how it contributes to how you feel, and maybe even cultivate a slight bit of compassion, those are all very appropriate goals of mindfulness, even if that end goal doesn't end up being directly feeling relaxed. So I say all this to hopefully take the pressure off some of these practices. That it doesn't always mean that you're going to feel completely refreshed and better. If you do, great. I'm not going to argue with that. But recognize that sometimes that's not always going to be the end game for each practice. And sometimes it's a matter of being able to check in with yourself and just at least understand why the stress is there and honor maybe some of what you need emotionally as well as physically to help manage that, right? So I thought we'd do a little bit of a practice surrounding this today to maybe, promote some awareness surrounding stress, how it affects you, recognizing, that stress, while always there in some way, shape, or form, can kind of ebb and flow, and how we can kind of work through some of those peaks and valleys. So go ahead and get comfy in whatever chair you may find yourself in today, just in a way that best supports your body. You can start to slowly bring awareness to your breath, allowing your focus to connect to the sensation of breathing. Remembering that the breath is an anchor to the here and now, regardless of what may be swirling around us. The breath can ground us. As you expand awareness of that breath and how it touches your nose or mouth, the back of your throat, your lungs, the muscles that expand around the middle of your body. Noticing the decompression of that as the breath travels out. Slowly expand awareness to your body and just noticing where everything is in relation to yourself. Noticing your feet, they're grounded on the floor, propped up. Noticing the pressure of your sit bones in your chair. and support of your spine against where you're sitting. Your neck aligned with your spine, your head aligned with your neck. Grounding in this space, knowing as you feel your way into your body, you might notice that stressful or anxious thoughts may arise at times. And instead of seeing it as an interruption or a barrier, seeing it as an opportunity to bring attention to those feelings. Be very gently dipping your toes into any feeling of stress or worry. If those thoughts come and go, that's okay. It's not that we're trying to push them out in a way to reduce stress. We just allow them to be there, noticing what influence it may have on your body, your emotion. Sometimes just working along the edges of these feelings of stress and acknowledging what's there. Maybe noticing what underlying threads of our lives are weaving into our stress. And cultivating an inch of compassion for why it is these feelings exist. Just as we can observe the breath, we can watch these thoughts like clouds that drift across the sky. Physical feelings of stress, thoughts are nothing but passing phenomenon. They're just thoughts, like any other of our senses of sight, sound, sensation, all coming and going. Noticing thoughts continue to change and morph. Recognizing where you may notice stress within your body. Some may notice that it's tension in the shoulders or setting the jaw, faster heart rate. Allowing awareness of this. Sometimes just leaning into feeling those things. And if at any point, those thoughts start to become a bit heavy or overwhelming, you can always take a break and come back to the breath. Again, remembering it's a choice that you have. Remembering that you can always come back to this space of grounding. Just allow yourself a moment of clarity to see what is going through your mind, what might be contributing to that, and allowing yourself a moment of understanding. As you continue to breathe in and out, bringing awareness back to your immediate surroundings a little bit. And consider setting an intention for where you would like to focus your energy and attention after this meditation. How you want to best manage your day, your demands, recognizing it can't all get done at once. And how staying in the moment and even just briefly connecting to the breath can sometimes help provide enough clarity, intention, and awareness for you to serve your own needs today. And remembering that the rest that you can't control, it's okay to try not to hold on to that cloud. Then let's take one more deep breath here, giving the body a burst of fresh oxygen, permeating every cell of your body. Start wiggling your fingers and toes. When the timing feels right, allowing yourself to gently open your eyes. Starting to see some open eyes. So as folks kind of reorient here, I'm always very curious to see what folks think of the discussion and our practice today, what happened for them, because every day is going to be a little bit different. When you pull water from the stream, it's always going to be different water. And so with each meditation practice, it brings its own challenges, its own rewards, its own flavor. So how was it today for you guys? And Shelley said, thank you. Discussion of stress is just what I needed today. I feel like that ends up being an incredibly relevant topic most days for pretty much everybody. So I was hoping this would be good for you guys. Um, Tom said it's okay to let go. One person did say they felt it was very relaxing. And so glad, Joan, you get to join us from Jamaica. And relaxing, beautiful meditation. Thank you. Few people said almost went to sleep, but not quite. So, and sometimes that happens too, in which case it may be a good idea to listen to what your body might be trying to tell you. Diana, at the beginning, I was distracted by a mental to-do list, but I jotted things down on my phone and was then able to focus on the meditation. Sometimes we literally need to put things out of our head, and I'll often recommend that to people to, if it's a thought that you want to get to later, but don't need to right now, write it down. Write it down on your phone, do a voice memo, have a pen and paper handy, whatever helps. And Chris said it was quite challenging to stay focused on this moment because of all those thoughts of what needs to be done. Yes, that mental to-do list is always ticking. And sometimes can be the hardest thing to acknowledge and then be able to let go of. So sounds like we've got, a few people who are given the thumbs up on today, which is fantastic. And breathing of all things, right? It's so, it's the simplest thing in the world and something we have to do anyways. But then just being able to use it intentionally for purposes to help ourselves can be really helpful. And someone said, surprising that recalling stress, which was initially unpleasant, became therapeutic when paired with a relaxation technique. And Roxanne said, I had trouble staying still and my body wants to move. So one thing I would say with that is if your body wants to move, there is no rule in meditation that says you can't move. You do not have to be, statue still. For some people that, to be still is helpful. For some people to move is helpful. So if it's an intentional movement that you can do in the midst of your practice, that is perfectly fine. And for some people, I have plenty of folks, with Parkinson's that have movements they can't necessarily help, whether it's their tremor or they have some sort of dyskinesia. There are some movements that are going to be there regardless. And so if you move, that's okay, intentionally or through a health issue, perfectly fine. And some people noticed that certain areas of their body were tense that they didn't realize, like their jaw. Yes, that's a common one. That's one that a lot of people catch themselves on. I tell people, pay attention to your coat hanger, your shoulders, your neck, your jaw, and your tongue pushing up against the roof of your mouth. Those are often pretty good signs and symptoms of some sort of tension or stress if you notice those areas, at least one or two crunching up. And so, well, thank you guys. So we are right at time today. So I did good with getting us efficiently through our practice today, but hopefully in an effective way. And I always want to bring you guys some, just some little different spin on some of these practices that we know and we hear all the time. But I think just again with stress, remembering it's going to be a part of life, and stress management does not necessarily mean getting rid of it, but honoring the challenges that come along with it. So giving yourself a little grace and a little room to breathe can sometimes go a long way. So thank you guys for joining.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rush, and really appreciate all of the comments that you all are sharing in the chat. It brings this, I want to say, like mystical practice into reality, right? And just allowing us to really apply this to our day to day that makes mindfulness so applicable in our journey through life, navigating it with Parkinson's. So thank you, Dr. Rush, for your time, and for all of you who continue to show up for yourselves. That ripples out into the impact it has on all the people that you touch in the world. So thank you for your presence, and Dr. Rush for your guidance. So until soon, I'll see you all next week. Be well.